Thanks for the great intro, and thank you everybody for coming. You know, when James reached out and said, this is your theme, we sat down and said, well, first of all, it is kind of kismet because we are called cosmic centaurs, and that just, it's a match made in heaven, I think. And then we tried to think about how can we tell a story about like destiny and fate, but also what you do with it. And so we decided that we had to go back in time. That's why I'm saying, you know, the things that, where they take you and how you get there. It's always easier to post-rationalize it, but it's really important to do that too, because there are so many lessons to learn from that. And so we are not going to take you back to our childhoods, although that would have been a nice
Good
slide
stories,
deck.
but not for today.
We're just going to take you back to 2017. And we're going to tell you the story of, well, our individual stories, and then the story of how we came together and how Cosmic came to be and why we're here today and what we've learned about Kismet and fate and destiny and how we think you should approach it, right? So 2017, a little bit about my background story. I'm an architect by training. I never built anything in the real world. I started working in a tech company straight out, just before graduating, actually. Spent 9 years there. I ran a digital agency, then it grew and it became part of a bigger group. And I ended up managing a team of 60 people across 3 continents and 10 cities and 7 time zones. But I didn't know, I always like to joke, I didn't know what EBITDA meant. I had to Google it. It's like a financial term. Every time I was in a meeting with like some investor or something, I really felt stupid. So I thought maybe it's a good thing to like get some education going. And so I was encouraged by my employer at the time to go and attend an amazing school in France where I was living, which is called INSEAD. I was one of the few people there that came from the tech space. Everybody else came from like large corporations, oil and gas, pharma, things like that. And they were actually quite miserable, I observed. In fact, by the end of our year program, about 50% of them had quit their jobs. And I was very curious about that because kind of spending the first 10 years of my career in the tech world, it comes with a lot of like energy and motivation and passion, and people feel a sense of purpose, like they're building something important. I'd never experienced misery at work. It was new to me. And so I thought that I wanted to understand what happens when we grow these organizations and something breaks. Or it doesn't. Some things work really well, otherwise they wouldn't scale. But I was very curious about it. And I think curiosity is the first lesson for me in Kismet. It led me to my next place, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But let's see what Talo's doing at the time.
Yeah, so while Marilyn was at INSEAD, I was actually also pursuing my postgraduate studies. I was at Columbia in New York, and it was a dream of mine. I always wanted to live in New York, and I didn't get into NYU the first time, and I was crushed. And then ultimately, I found a great program, and I was working in PR at the time, which is what James was telling you, and getting up early before work, studying for the GRE, getting what I needed for my applications, and really doing everything I could to make this dream of mine a reality. And so, what ended up coming true was that, of course, like I was really grateful I got in, and I felt like, wow, the stars aligned and I finally got what I wished for. But actually, when I think about it in hindsight, it was a lot of hard work, and it wasn't just I wished for something and it came true like a birthday wish, put in the hours, and it was difficult. But that's the thing with Kismet, right? It's like also you put things in motion to make them happen, and that was a really big thing for me, is that Kismet's it's part of it, but it's also a lot of the hard work that goes on behind the scenes to really make it happen. So I was at that time in New York, and Marilyn was in
not. France. We both were not here. I was in France, and then 2018 was a year of transformation for me, and a lot of things happened. I left the company where I was really happy. My husband, who's here, we got married that summer, and then he got a job in Dubai, and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm Lebanese, I speak Arabic, I come from tech. How hard can it be to get a job in Dubai, right? I must be able to figure it out. And here's what happened. So I start looking for a job. I'm still in Paris at the time. And then out of nowhere, I get this text. So we've removed people's names, but you can still see what it says. Essentially, somebody I don't know texts me and says, this person recommended you for a job. What's the job? Oh, working with the chairman of EMAR. Oh, just that. Okay. Who recommended me? What's the story? So it turned out that 4 years before that, someone came to see me, one of my clients at the time, and she said, my cousin's an architect, and she's thinking about a change in career, so wondering if she goes into tech or not. Would you have time for her? I said, sure. So she came over for what was supposed to be an hour-long meeting and ended up being 3 hours, and I introduced her to a bunch of other people. We have a lot of 3-hour conversations in the story, actually. At the end, maybe I'll also tell you, if you have a 3-hour conversation with someone, it's kismet. It'll get you somewhere. And that was it. I never saw her again, but I tried to share what I knew, what I learned, what made me decide to leave architecture so that she could maybe, find her way. She ended up not quitting architecture, came to Dubai, ended up working for EMAR, and the chairman of EMAR is very close to the design of the master plans, and so very close to the design team, and so she was like in the entourage, let's say. And someone said, oh, the chairman's looking for people who are like a bit senior, a bit tech savvy. Do you know somebody? 4 years later, she brings up my name. Hadn't seen her in that time, hadn't really spoken to her. And I get this text. And then I go into the process. And eventually I get hired to work for the chairman's office of EMAR, which is pretty goddamn incredible. Can I swear in CreativeMornings? Oh, that's not my worst. That was me censoring myself. And so we moved to Dubai, and I work in this organization that's just doing really crazy things at a scale that's, fascinating, that I'd never had before in a tech company. And then I always joke that this was what I call my Charlie's Angels job, because I didn't have a job description, but Charlie would call me. And he'd be like, this is your mission, Angel. And so I ended up being the chief marketing officer of EMAR for a year in 2019. And then I'll tell you a little bit in a second what happens after that.
At the same time, I'm back in Dubai working at Ogilvy, and someone who opened doors for me all throughout my career, opened yet another door. And it was a unique position at a company that I used to be at. So I was no longer doing PR, I was doing strategy and planning, and I really enjoyed it. And I feel like in hindsight, it's what really helped me learn a lot of the mindsets and models and the nature of the work that I do today at Cosmic. And so it was a wonderful experience, but I felt like I was ready for something different. I had gone back to the same place I was working at, and I really wanted change. And that same person opened yet another door for me. And I think one thing I can take away from all of that is how nurturing your relationships and investing in them can really help to open those doors and create those opportunities. Because like Marilyn said, it's maybe 1 3-hour conversation, but it could also be like someone you've spent, 5 years of your career with. And so when he opened that door for me, actually it was a door at EMAR. And so I was looking for a new opportunity, and he was moving to the marketing department there. And he was like, well, why don't you come with me? And I was like, great, that sounds wonderful. What do I need to do? And all I had to do was go in for a single interview with somebody. That interview was scheduled, and everything was meant to take place. And it was all supposed to be really all well and done. And I get there and they're like, the interview is canceled. And I was like, oh no, but I'm in my suit, and I woke up that morning and I did everything an interviewer would do. I prepared, and I'm a good student, and I drove in the car and I recited what I was going to say. And then they were like, you can come back at the same time tomorrow. So it was the longest 48-hour day of my life. I did it again. I woke up, I showered, I put on the outfit, I got in the car, I recited what I was going to say. And I sat down with the CMO of EMAR, and I was meeting Marilyn. And she interviewed me, and it was a remarkable 3-hour conversation. And it was, I'll never forget it. This was the outfit that I wore 2 days in a row. And this was the Rove Cafe in which we sat in. But, for me, kind of what I take away from that initial story is that, with Kismet, sometimes the opportunity arises twice. It's really meant to be in those situations. It's not one of those times when, it was a one-off and you let it slide. There's a reason why it presented itself again. And so I just felt really fortunate to have had that conversation, and it's playing a role in where we get to today.
Yeah. all of this unbeknownst to me. I didn't even know an interview had been scheduled. There'd been some big miscommunication. But and when I was a CMO at Amar, you guys could imagine, especially pre-pandemic, it was pretty mad. I think I used to work, I still do, but for different reasons. But I used to work a good, on good days, 12 hours, and on normal days, maybe 15 or so. And so 3 hours was like not cheap currency for me.
No.
But in comes Tala, and she's just like full of questions. And I always say, like, judge somebody by the quality of their questions, not their answers. And then I ended up spending 3 hours there. I think your dad called.
Yeah, he was like, did they get you to start working automatically? Are you alive?
And so Tala joined the team. But that's not where our paths converge.
Nope.
Well, they converged this first time, and then they converge again in a little bit. And then 2020 happens. So in the meantime, Charlie called me again, and I became the CEO of the Dubai Opera in the end of 2019. I always say yes, that's another one, right? Who in their right mind? I just think curiosity and learning is something I always say yes to.
Yeah.
And so when someone says, hey, you want to do this thing you're completely unqualified to do? I'm like, sure, sign me up. So I did end up being the CEO of the Dubai Opera for about 6 months, up until the pandemic. And of course, as the pandemic started and the opera closed its doors, I was fired. And as all of you, I went home and started making amazing meals, for about 3 days after the lockdown. Hadi was there. It so happened that my best friend had just moved to Dubai about a week before lockdown. And she was like, oh, I'm just going to stay with you guys for 2 weeks, and then I'm going to find my place and be out of your hair. She ended up staying for 4 months. And we just all sat in this house. And so I was like, I'm going to kill everybody. And I decided it was a good time to start a company. I also decided to put out a podcast episode. So my best friend and I have this podcast that we've been doing since 2018, I want to say, called Who Run the World, all about, what it's like to be an Arab woman in the world today. And as we were sitting there, 5 minutes after getting fired, I'm like, we should tell everybody. She's like, are you sure you're ready? I said, yeah, look, there's no shame. We all go through this. This happens for a million reasons. I don't feel like I could have done anything differently or better. And I think everybody else should have that space too. I think people should see that it's all right to say it, and that there's really nothing to be ashamed of, and you can be vulnerable about that. And that turned out in retrospect to be a really great, evil, genius move, because then everybody I knew that I was available, and that, I was open to doing new things. And so I said, okay, what do you want to do, Marilyn? Like, if you don't fail miserably at this company you're going to launch, because that's what I decided to do at that moment. I was like, I need to start a company. What do you want to spend your time doing? And the one thing that had always been at the heart of everything for me, something that my heart beats for, is human collaboration. I love it when people come together and they can build something that's greater than the sum of their parts. And I just think it's pure magic when it happens. And so I'm like, okay, well, what's the biggest, thing getting in the way of human collaboration? Oh, remote work. Okay, I've done that before. So I just started posting tips. Every day I would post one about how to do remote work. This was end of March 2020. And then people just started messaging me and saying oh, you know all this stuff, you should start a company. I was like, funny, you should say that. And that gave me it was a perfect storm. I wasn't going to look for another job, right? I was lucky that I had been able to save up a bit of money, so I wasn't too worried about having to put food on the table, and I had great support. And I'd always had it in the back of my mind that I would do this. And so when I tell this story and people are like, oh my God, it's so amazing how you started a company in the pandemic, I'm like, really, I deserve no credit for that. It was the perfect storm. There was no better thing to do. I do deserve credit, and I think the whole team deserves credit for building the company up from there. But starting it, I got really lucky, because if I'd been in my golden cage, getting paid really well, okay, sure, the job was tough, but whatever, I was saving up or whatever it was, a million other circumstances. If someone had called me and said, hey, you're interested in this other job, might have taken it. So I got really lucky in that sense, to just be in the middle of a perfect storm.
At the same time, a storm was brewing at Amar, and that's where I was working at the time. It was the height of the pandemic. This photo I took on my last day in the office before the world went into lockdowns. And at the time, I was working on crisis communications for the group, which was so intense. And it was a lot to manage across the different entities. And there was a lot of ambiguity. I was on a freelance contract. I realized I was going home. And for me, the office was the place of work. I hadn't worked elsewhere. I didn't know how to translate that. And so, I moved my office setup back home and was working until at some point I kind of felt like this is really not going to last. I mean, I'm on a freelance contract, like nothing's going to materialize out of this. And so I did what everybody else did. Like Marilyn said, I baked banana bread and I watched Tiger King, and we adopted cats. We did the whole pandemic experience. And then I got a call. And I got a call from Marilyn who, she was telling me a little bit about what she was doing. But maybe you want to tell a little bit about how you got to me. Yeah.
So same guy who introduced me to Tala, Sami. We love him. One day called me out of concern because he'd seen, my podcast out and he just wanted to check in. We used to work together. He's like, how are you doing? What are you up to? And by then I got really lucky, right? So again, that power of that network. So I launched the company in April of 2020. And because I was so public, and again, genius move, but I didn't know, because I was so public about that journey, all of my friends knew I was available to do things, right? And so I got my first gig in May, which is really incredible. And I'm like, I'm going to need someone to join the team. And it just so happened that Sami called me that day. And he's like, how are you doing? What's going on? He was checking in on me. And I said, yeah, this happened. And I have my first client, but I think I need to hire someone. And so he says, why not Tala? And so I called Tala.
Yeah. And I got that call and it was exciting. And I was like, sure, let's do it. She just wanted, somebody to kind of help with some content and marketing. And I was like, I got this, let's dive in. But little did I know it would be the foundations of what is the most remarkable part of my career so far. And so what ended up happening was I joined, and after 2 weeks, it was more than just a freelance gig. It became a full-time offer. And it was really amazing because I remember my husband's also here. We went for a walk. And when Marilyn said, do you want to come full-time? And, we can build this together. Some people might have been like, are you sure? Because what are you building? And do you know? But we always say, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. And so for me, it was a hell yes, because for those 2 weeks, I had learned so much, and I was really enjoying building the relationship, and I had never gotten the chance to build something from the ground up, and it was a really exciting opportunity. So when, my husband asked, he's like, are you going to take it? I was like, yeah, I'm going to take it. Like, why wouldn't I take it? I'd be a fool not to. And I think coming back to what Marilyn said earlier about kismet and curiosity, it's like you let that guide you, right? And kind of get you to where you want to be, and take a little bit of a risk if you feel like it is, because that's the reason why that opportunity is there. You don't know what the other side of the coin is, but in our case, it's a pretty epic side of the coin.
And so we've been building the company. I also, Marie and I could tell a whole Kismet story. She's sitting here. We worked together in our first company for 7 years. I convinced her to join us eventually. Took me a while. And we've built this company over the last 2 years. And honestly, we could give you 30 examples of these moments. They just happen and you're like, somehow they materialize into something magical, but we just picked 2 of them. And the first one is, again, a follow on from that podcast episode. So my friend Francis from INSEAD saw that I had started a company. The other genius move was hiring a marketeer as my first kind of team member, because I was like, okay, I don't know what we sell, but we got to make everybody believe that we're really good at this. We don't have a product, but we do know what themes we want to cover. So make content. That was the pitch. And so that's another one that has stayed with us as a company, which is, I always say, if people aren't sick and tired of seeing us in their feed, we haven't done enough. And Francis, my friend from INSEAD, saw me in his feed, messaged me, and was like, listen, I've been listening to your podcast and seeing your content and whatever. And is there anything I can do to help? And I'm Lebanese. you don't ask for help in my culture. I don't know if any of yours are similar. Like, never. Like, oh my God, that I told everybody I had been fired, right? And so you don't say like, yes, actually, I would really love some help. Usually it's like a culture of like self-sacrifice. And so thanks to many years of learning to come out of that process, I'm like, actually, yes. I have just been thinking this week that I need a pro bono client to test out my methodology on. Do you know somebody? I thought he might introduce me to like 5 people. I'd have some chats. It would take, I thought there would be a process. And he's like, what about my company? It's like, yeah. And so a thing that I learned also about, I've had the experience of the universe being a very abundant place.
Yeah.
My whole life, and these 2 years particularly. But I think it's not abundant if you don't ask for things. And when you receive them, if you don't know how to accept them. It's always a process to learn to accept that help. Like, I could have been like, oh my God, no, it's your company. Maybe something smaller, maybe someone I don't know, so that at least if I mess it up, I don't have to live with this for the rest of my life. But that reaction of saying, I will accept what you're giving me, I think is something that took me a really long time to learn, but it's such a huge part of like how Kismet works for you. Because if you don't accept it, then it just keeps going, right? And then I think the second part is like, we worked our ass off for that project. Yeah. It wasn't pro bono work.
No.
We treated it like it was gold, and it was. And it allowed us to develop our methodology and to have our first client and to get many more after that. But it started with asking and accepting. And our second example.
Yeah, on the note of accepting, we had an intern that joined us, and she wasn't quite what we thought Centaurs would be like, where Centaurs we're very spirited, we're very strong, we work really hard, and, there's a few things of what it takes to be a cosmic Centaur, and she didn't have all of those qualities, but she did have one good idea. And when we were talking about, webinars and marketing, because, the brief was clear, put our name out there and we'll figure it out as we go. We were saying, we should do webinars. Everybody was having, these conversations on Zoom. She's like, what about a conference? Like, you know what, we'll take you up on that idea. And so that laid the foundations for what became the series of cosmic conferences. And our first one was around the future of work. This is in July. I mean, Marilyn started the company in April. So we really pulled it all together, and we had, I think, over 15 speakers. We had 1,000 attendees, and it was really crazy because we were still trying to figure out what it was that we were kind of offering to everybody beyond these insights and the knowledge. But that in itself was really great because we were able to, put our name out there and build our networks. And like Marilyn said, it was a lot of hard work. I mean, I'd never hosted a virtual conference before in that way, but it ended up being a great success. And I think, we always credit that intern for this idea. We never take it on our own. But the lesson that kind of is behind that is, not just about listening actively, but it's also really just about kind of accepting okay, this is what we'll take from you, and that'll be the value you add. And everybody along the way has been able to contribute to the story in some way. And it's been really great to see. We've had Centaurs come and Centaurs go, and everybody has helped to shape it and build it. And when you see how it all comes together into what it is today, it's something we're really, really proud of.
Yeah. It's the messenger sometimes is just not who you expect. We could have dismissed it because on everything else, this person just wasn't performing. And so you could have been like, yeah, sure, whatever. But instead, actually, we're like, yeah, brilliant. We did it in 8 days. You forgot to mention that.
Yeah, 8 days.
We're like, okay, so Eid is coming up.
Yeah.
We have to do it before then because then everybody else is going to be on summer vacation after that.
Yeah.
We have never done a conference in our life. We're like, what's the worst that can happen? Nobody shows up. And we have a really nice chat with our buddies. Yeah. All right, let's go. And so in 8 days, and again, it's kind of that jumping on it. And, especially for 2 people who come from marketing, there's this sense of this has to be perfect. 8 days. Are you crazy? Nobody's going to come. What kind of speakers are going to say yes on this kind of notice? And we're like, we're just going to try.
Yeah.
And I think that spirit has also stayed with us.
Yes.
Actually, one of our principles is no one cares that you exist. Because, you guys, maybe some of you come from these creative industries, and I know there's always this moment of it's not ready. And the it's not ready can take a year or 3 or 5. How many of you have projects? I know I do, others, just not cosmic, but projects that I sat on forever.
Yeah.
And I think that leap of just putting it out there and seeing what happens has been like a really beautiful lesson for us. And so in the process, we've built a great company. We have amazing Centaurs who have joined us. You know, we're now a team of 6 with a couple of developers in Bosnia. This is all of us. I mean, when I started the company, if you told me that, you know, all of these people would have faith and trust us and join and spend their time building this thing up, I wouldn't have believed it. And then Kismet sometimes works in other interesting ways. We both got pregnant at the same time.
Could not have planned that one.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
You know, like for a business of, you know, less than 10 people, to have 2 of its senior members have to be away from the business. Like Tala, we're not sure. Maybe it'll happen today.
Could be now, guys. Any minute.
I'm following soon in June. And Marie here is going to like keep the reins going. But it's a tough time, right?
Yeah.
Like it's hard. And you have to deal with, Kismet goes both ways. And it's a beautiful personal event, but it's really hard for us. And like, we're still working 15 hours a day.
Yeah.
Our families think we're insane. Like
Totally.
my mother, I can tell you the story about how I was born. My mother was at the office until 10 p.m., went home and called her doctor saying like, I kind of feel like I have the second child, by the way, so she knows she's in labor. Doctor says, meet me in the hospital. I was born by midnight. I don't know if any of you know anything about labor, but it's not a 2-hour process. And so I asked her about this recently, and I'm like, this explains my whole life. Because my mother was in labor while she was working until 10 p.m., right? So, Kismet. But we take it, you know, and I think it's also something that I love about our team and the spirit that we've been able to build is just, we believe in that abundance. We are joyful. Even when really shitty things happen, we stay like committed and positive and aligned, and we express solidarity and compassion, and it gets us through it, I think. And so we're really super grateful to have gotten as far as we've gotten. And as we were thinking about this, actually rereading the description of Kismet on the Creative Mornings website this morning, I was like, oh yeah, like same conclusion, right? Fortune happens, like things happen. But we've shared a few lessons, right? About being curious, about nurturing your relationships and caring for them, making time for others, giving before you take, working your butt off when it comes in, accepting help when it's offered and asking for it. And then dealing with the other side of the coin with hopefully grace when you can. And that's how you become prepared. And so publish that thing you've been sitting on forever, take that opportunity, ask for help, accept it, put things out there, and somehow they will come back. And we hope that that's the lesson that our story has shared. And thank you so much for coming this morning. And waking up early. We hope that, you're able to take something away from this, and we're really grateful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any tips on the flip side of the coin, handling situations with grace?
Yes. I'll give you my mantra in life. I always say, if there's no solution, there's no problem. That's mine. I don't know if you have a different one.
There's no solution, no problem.
Essentially, it's like, if something happens and reasonably there's nothing you can do about it, even if it's terrible, then you shouldn't deal with it as a problem, in the sense that you shouldn't try to keep solving it. Because sometimes, like, how many times you have a conversation with someone, it didn't go as you planned, and you spent 3 weeks rethinking it in your head. And how much processing time did you waste on that, right? And obviously it's not easy, but I think what I've built as a mechanism for that moment is just, it's okay to like feel how you're feeling and acknowledge it, and then say, okay, but this is where the line ends, and I have to keep moving, because you can't fix it. The only thing you can fix is what you do from here. And so being deliberate, I think, and intentional about how you deal with that flip side, even just for your own health, right? Like you can get yourself sick worrying about something you can't change. And I think it's better to spend that energy on something else. And I think it's just a habit that, like you build that trigger defense. The second that happens, you're like, okay, I'm feeling anxious, overwhelmed, I'm feeling a sense of loss, like whatever it is, right? I acknowledge it. But here's what I'm going to do with my time instead. That's my trick.
Yeah. I think something I keep in mind is like, just in the same way that like great things happen when the stars align and, you know, destiny gives you something really positive, the negatives or the challenges are there for that same reason, to teach you just as much. And so for me, it's like acknowledging like, what is this here to teach me and what are we here to learn from it? And we couldn't have predicted this, and it's a challenge for the company, and we're getting through it because we're deliberate and having open conversations about how we feel about it and how the team feels about it and how we're going to support them. But that grace, it really just comes with kind of understanding that like these challenges are also there because they're part of that journey. And then even better things might come later, and it might get hard, but calling what you said, I mean, we used to say at Ogilvy, like, never a problem, always a challenge. So like just changing your mindset and saying it's a challenge and it has a solution. And it's not a problem that we can't solve. There's always a way around it. So
yeah. And I think gratitude really works too. Yeah. Like, we've been really lucky, honestly. Yeah. Like, I've had a blessed life. I mean, I could tell you the other story, right? Like, we could spend some time together and I can tell you the tragic version of my life. But also look at all these wonderful things that I have and all these wonderful people who are part of it. And it's all right, like, to get a few like curveballs and bad days and really tragic events, because that has happened to all of us. But I'm also really grateful mostly for everything else. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks.